Do you want to increase engagement, decrease absenteeism and turnover, and increase the motivation of your people? Well, the most important thing we can do is recognize our people. So today, let's learn why it's so important and how to get it right. I could share all the data in the world of why recognition is important for the success of your company. I could share that it decreases turnover by 25% when people get recognized once a month, that profitability goes up and turnover goes down. I could give you all those stats. But today, what I really want to share is the real role that it plays in why it is so critically important for our relationships at work and even outside of work, and why you want to make sure that you intentionally focus on it if you really want to make a difference at work. Hi, I'm Chris Littlefield, and one thing I don't often talk about is that my background is actually in international conflict resolution. I spent the first part of my career facilitating dialogues between Israelis and Palestinians, Indians, Pakistanis, Greek and Turkish Cypriots, and then I started doing work with senior leaders of the United Nations, and then I started doing some of the toughest dialogues of all between HR and finance, and you probably get what I'm talking about if you work in one of those roles. And my job was to create the kind of environment where people could have the conversations that matter most. And the ironic part was several years ago when I was running one of these cross-border dialogue programs between people from Armenia and Azerbaijan, I had a toxic work relationship with two of my coworkers. And if you know what I mean by a toxic work relationship, it's when you find yourself fighting in the car with your coworker and they're not in the car with you. And so I had two of them at the same time, and we did everything to try to navigate this dynamic. And after 2 years, we still kept on just triggering each other and just getting frustrated. And we could barely be in the room together with one another. And after trying everything we could to resolve it, it was a 15-minute recognition activity that actually turned around that relationship when nothing else worked. It was the end of one of our days. We had been fighting and frustrated all day. And so wanting to not just repeat the same pattern, I turned to my coworker and just asked her, what do you want to be acknowledged for? And I don't know you, but have you ever had somebody share one thing about who they are or what they're dealing with that changed your whole perspective of them? And I realized that the participants from her side of the conflict told her that she was a traitor to the country for being there. And I had no clue that she had been going through that. And we thanked her for that. And right there, I realized that many of the things that people want to be recognized for, that they're dealing with, we never see. And when we do, and we start to understand our coworkers, it changes our whole relationship. And so after that, I started studying the human relationship to recognition. I interviewed 400 people on the subway in Boston. You can check out my TED Talk on employee recognition. I'll include a link to that in the video description below. But what I realized that there's a huge power to acknowledgement, recognition, and praise. But because we're often uncomfortable with it, we avoid it. And when we avoid it, we rob ourselves and others of the benefit that it brings. So let's talk about what some of those benefits are. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is I want you to think about your experience when you feel completely valued at work. What's it like showing up to work? Where does your energy go when you're at work? One of the things that I notice when I come into work with organizations is I can tell you within the first couple hours of talking with folks what kind of environment. And I tend to find that people either are working with each other, people are working around each other, or worse, people are working against each other. And when people feel valued and they're working with each other, all of their time and energy is being used to be able to do their best work and, more importantly, to live their best lives outside of work. And when people are working around each other, we're using all of our energy to be able to navigate around each other to get work done. And we're working against each other, well, we're using all of our time and energy to fight each other. And when we're in that environment, we're spending all this money as companies, and where is it going? To infighting, to holding each other back, to sabotaging each other's work. And the way that we turn those relationships around, and I'm not going to say it's just by giving compliments to one another, but it's actually taking the time to understand each other and understand what people want and need to feel valued. So if you think about it, the foundation of our relationships is actually built and maintained through recognition. And not recognition like the rewards and awards side of things, but recognition as in the appreciating the person, those small signals that we send every day to show people that we value them. There was actually a famous study that was done by the Gottman Institute, and I want to be able to bring this to share something that you can also use at home. But there was a study that was done in the 80s by the Gottman Institute, which studied relationships. And they did this really fascinating study that often gets misquoted. And what they did is they filmed couples in the first year of their marriage talking about a conflict. And they knew normally people just say they were just having a conversation, but they're actually talking about a conflict in their relationship. And they filmed the couples for 15 minutes talking about this conflict. And then they coded the video to both positive and negative interaction. Positive interactions, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're right, I do that sometimes. Or a pat on the back, a smile, or a micro gesture. And then there was the negative interactions, like, oh, you always do this, or rolling the eyes, or turning away from the other person. And they were able to predict with 92% accuracy whether the couple would be married in 5 years. And it came down to what they call the magic ratio. For each negative interaction, there were 5 or more positive interactions, and they stayed together. Less than that, they got divorced. And by the way, if it went 13 to 1, 13 positive to each negative, they also got divorced because you're living in the clouds, because conflict is actually a healthy part of our relationships. And that same thing applies in our experience at work. If you were right now to think of and write down the names of all the people on your team or all your coworkers, and you were to rank what was the positive to negative interaction ratio with them on a day-to-day basis? Are you only reaching out to them when you have a problem? Are you only reaching out to them when you need something from them? Are you only reaching out to them when you're frustrated with something? Well, guess what your ratio probably is. And so if we want to actually maintain the kind of environments where our communication flows, where people feel valued, where they feel cared for, where they feel engaged and they feel appreciated, then we need to send those regular signals. And we send those signals through the little actions each day. There is recognizing people and sharing how much we value them. There's also joking around with each other. There's also giving feedback, because the thing that people don't realize is that many mothers are known for doing this, where they only tell you the things you're doing right. And you're like, yeah, okay, great. But then somebody else, like maybe it's your dad, only tells you do something right once. And then all of a sudden it's the most memorable recognition because there's scarcity to it. And we forget that if you want people to value your praise, you also need to give them feedback. And if you want people to value your feedback, you also need to give them praise. So the reason why recognition is so critically important for our relationships at work and our relationships outside of work is it's the foundation of our relationships. So if you want people to take that feedback, make sure you're letting them know that you value them. So today, think for a second, what's the ratio of positive to negative interactions that you're having with each person on your team? And then think about what's one thing you could do to shift it. So the last thing that I want to note here is that what we recognize gets repeated. And so the other critical reason why recognition is so critical to the success of our company is it shows people what matters. So when senior leaders recognize a certain behavior consistently, guess what they get? They get more of that behavior. And if you ever watch a senior manager recognize one senior leader for the way they presented their results, and then every other senior leader presented the results the same way in the future, that's why that works. So if you get really clear on the target behaviors that you want to see more of on your team, and it's not just being innovative, because nobody knows what that looks like in action, but think about what does innovation look like on our team, and then as a leader, intentionally recognize when somebody does that behavior, or when they do 10% of that behavior, they're still moving towards doing that thing more. And if you start recognizing those target behaviors in your organization, you're more likely to get more of those behaviors in the future. And in turn, you're going to increase the results. So if you want your people to use their time and energy to move the work forward and live the lives they want, then do those little things each day, like appreciating people, acknowledging people, and recognizing people. And if you do that on a consistent basis, then you're more likely to get better results. I'm Chris Littlefield from Beyond Thank You, and I hope you found this video helpful. And if you want to help your leaders understand the real value of recognition and learn how to get it right in your organization, reach out to me at beyondthankyou.com.